Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the ABCs of Law Firm Financials, Accounting, Billing, and Keeping It All Compliant. Our speaker today is Erica Bursler. Erica is the Director of Strategic Communications at CosmoLex, developers of an all-in-one cloud-based legal practice management, billing, and trust accounting system specifically designed for solo and small law firms. Erica's degree is in business administration, and she has over 6 years of experience in the legal software industry, catering to the specialized technology needs of small to mid-sized law firms. Erica has given numerous presentations across the country on legal technology, such as law practice technology management, cloud computing, and legal billing and trust accounting compliance. Thank you all for joining us. We'll now begin the webinar.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. So as mentioned, what we will be talking about is specifically the ABCs, so accounting, billing, and overall compliance. So we'll start with the basics, talk a little bit about what the workflows tend to be in a law firm for these particular functions, how compliance plays a role, and the common challenges that come with dealing with financials. We do know that law firms, most of the staff, including of course the attorneys, are not bookkeepers. So likely for many of you, financials is a little bit of a unknown territory. So being aware of not just what they are, but often the challenges that other law firms face, I think would be helpful. And then we're going to talk about technology. Surprisingly with financials, technology is not the first thing that you think about, but when we talk about each one of these sections, we'll kind of pull in the fact that the tools, the processes, the resources that you use can actually affect not just your efficiency, but your accuracy when dealing with your financials. Okay, so before we get specifically into financials, I also like to talk about how that one portion of your business is actually tied into a lot of other things. And I like to bring up this point because the different processes that you have, or even the different tools that you use, or the responsibilities of your various staff, you may not think actually relate to each other when they very much do. So it gives you an idea of what workflows to keep in mind, what gaps to identify, to just help the overall process. So when we talk about financials, it is half of this image here. So actually more than half, it is 3/5 of it. So the legal time and billing, which is your time tracking, your invoicing, your payments, also your business accounting, which is how you run your business. You're tracking your income and your expenses, generating your accounting reports, filing your taxes, and then the trust accounting component, which is really how compliance comes into play. That is where you have your certain federal but also state compliance requirements that are present for you to uphold because you are responsible for those funds. Those are the 3 areas that we're mostly going to be focusing on today. But the other areas too, it's important to know how they play a role in your financials. So when we talk about your daily activities, it could be the drafting of your emails, it could be the appointments that you have on your calendar, it can be the different tasks that you need to do for all of your clients. The way they file into your financials is actually very simple. If you have billable activities, if you're billing, let's say hourly to your clients, those factor into your billing cycle. Your billing cycle factors into your trust accounting, and trust accounting and payments and all of those factor into your business accounting. So these all really go hand in hand. The communication between these different functions is very important, and you'll see them kind of come to light in a lot of the different challenges that we talk about today. So let's first dive into our A topic, which is accounting. So when we talk about accounting, I do like to mention kind of the foundation of legal accounting. Legal accounting is not the same as accounting for every other business. Some of it is, but some of it's not. So this first point here, business accounting, is the portion that really every business needs to worry about. That is keeping track of your costs, that is tracking your income that comes in from various sources, that is being able to generate your general accounting reports like your profit and loss and your balance sheet, and managing your general ledger in-house, being able to produce the necessary reports to file your taxes end of year. That is fairly consistent across the board. Yes, you might have some different types of costs and income, but in general, that has to be managed no matter what type of business you have. But these next two areas are where it gets a little bit more legal specific. The way you handle your client costs. We'll talk about this a bit today. How they get recorded, how do they make sure that they're billed, as well as once you do bill your clients, you receive that payment. How is that payment recorded? How is that accounted for from not just a billing perspective, but an accounting perspective? And then the third point is really where trust accounting comes into play. That's when you're handling fee advances or retainers. As I mentioned, there's certain requirements associated to that as well. And that's a big area where compliance plays a part. I mean, there's many different points that we'll talk about with compliance, but definitely when you're talking about holding your client's money or even holding a settlement that needs to be dispersed out to various parties, compliance is very important to keep in mind. So keep that foundation kind of in mind as we go forward. And the first thing in the accounting part is the workflow. So understanding exactly what accounting is in your firm. And like I mentioned, you may have different people doing different functions related to either the billing or accounting that we talk about today. I think it's best for each point that we go through is not to know how to do it, but at least know who's doing it and what's their process. Is it working? Is it not working? Are there challenges? And if you don't know, start a conversation about it and become a little bit more aware. So the first thing with accounting is the general ledger. Now the general ledger, again, we're getting into the basics. That is your listing of accounts, income accounts, expense accounts, assets, liabilities, equity, everything that makes up your books. When we talk about your accountant books, this is exactly what we're talking about. So every transaction that you do has to have a double entry. One entry will usually affect cash or a certain bank account, and the other entry will usually affect, let's say I'm paying office supplies today. That's going to be an expense account. If I'm receiving a invoice payment, that will affect an income account. So all of that goes around your general ledger, and very often that's customized based on your firm's needs. Payables. So you owe and you need to pay bills as a business. You may have rent, utilities, you may even have certain client payables, like maybe you're paying something on behalf of your client that is due in a week or two, you received a bill for it. That has to be tracked. When are certain items due? When are they paid? Is there a balance? So on and so forth. Cost reimbursement. So being able to track not just your firm costs, but like I said, also client costs that you may be paying so that you can make sure that you get reimbursed. Client funds, those are those retainers or settlement funds that you may be managing. You need to be able to track them effectively and have just somebody responsible for staying on top of those numbers. Income, so when those invoice payments come in, not only do you need to update your invoice and make sure the balances are correct, but what is that income? Who is it for? What timekeepers or attorneys or practice areas, or is it for fee? Is it for reimbursed cost? There's a lot of analysis that can happen there. Bank reconciliation, that is, very typical routine bookkeeping activity. Each and every month, that is the minimum. You have to at least do it each and every month, if not more frequent. You need to be able to track what is in your book record, what is in your bank record, discover any differences and discrepancies, and fix them as soon as possible. You should be reconciling any bank account that you have. That includes your operating account and also even your credit cards, but trust account is required because if there is mistakes made either internally or by the bank, you need to be aware of it as soon as possible so that you can go ahead and rectify those. So that is definitely a must to get that done regularly. And then your overall reports. So when it comes to accounting, really all of this is, I don't want to say useless, but it doesn't mean much without a report to back it up. If you were to get audited, if you're filing your taxes, it's all based on certain reporting. So being able to produce trust reports, billing reports even to see what has come in per person, collection reports, the profit and loss and balance sheet like I mentioned, general ledger reports, all of that is all this data that you're doing day in and day out, but put in a sensible manner that you can actually read through and understand and analyze. So that is the workflow. That is just in general what takes place in a law firm when dealing with accounting. When we talk about compliance, understanding the issues that can come with that when dealing with those different functions. The first is lack of legal accounting knowledge. Now, what's interesting here is I mentioned in the very beginning how legal accounting is different than just your general business accounting. We don't expect all of you to be accountants. Nobody should expect that because that's not your area of expertise. Some of you may have a background there, but I'm sure most of you do not. You can absolutely outsource this activity, whether it's a on-staff accountant or somebody that you're outsourcing that may have an accounting company. That's quite common as well, or bookkeeping company. But you need to make sure they know how law firms run. I know far too often law firms hire a CPA or somebody who has this fantastic degree and has been doing accounting for 30 years, but you're their first law firm client. You need to be aware of that. I'm not saying you can't work with those people, but they need to take the time to educate themselves on what trust compliance is, what legal compliance is, what is required of you so that everything is being done properly. I also feel that whoever is taking on the main responsibility of the firm, whether it's a managing partner or if you have like an administrator in the firm, that they have a little bit of knowledge so they can also ensure things are being done the right way, because compliance falls on the firm 100%, not on the bookkeeper, not on the accountant. So you need to be able to have those touch points of let me check the bank statement, or let me look at these reports routinely just to see that things are going the way that they should. Double data entry, that can happen in many different situations, but especially for accounting, I think often people think if there is a bookkeeper or an accountant outside the firm or who is maybe only focusing on accounting and nothing else, they enter stuff in maybe a billing system and also then they enter an accounting system. For example, that invoice payment I mentioned. I have an invoice for $1,000. I receive that $1,000 into billing, and then I tell accounting, you also need to receive that $1,000 in accounting. So when you have duplicate data entry, two major issues. One, it's incredibly inefficient. So you're doing twice the work. The second is the risk of inaccuracy is that much higher. So any piece of information, that's kind of the one rule of efficiency, any piece of information you're dealing with, you should try your best possible to enter it once, but especially financials, because the more times you enter numbers, the more likely they are to be jumbled up, assigned to the wrong matter, add an extra zero. Those little, what could be a very simple mistake can have high consequences when dealing with specifically financials. Client funds. So when I talk about the trust account and dealing with compliance, you need to be mindful of what is required of you. That kind of goes back to that first point. These funds are not yours. That is why they're held to such a high standard. You're managing basically somebody else's money. So the basics are you need to be able to have ledgers for each and every one of your matters. You need to know those balances for each of them, the activity that took place. You need to ensure that you're not overdrafting on those ledgers because that is a compliance issue. You need to make sure you're not commingling, meaning mixing funds and losing track between your clients or even between your business funds versus your trust funds. And you need to be able to produce the proper reports. If you were to get audited, what is required of you? Each state does have a separate requirement, but you can ask in general what reports are needed for compliance and make sure whatever software you're using or tools that you're using have those reports available. Cost recovery. This is actually one of the biggest areas where money is lost. And when I talk about this topic, a lot of law firms suddenly gain interest because they realize that, yes, this is definitely happening and I'm definitely losing money. If you pay for costs out of pocket, I mentioned before, like a filing fee or a court cost on behalf of your client, you would not pay that cost otherwise, but it's for your client. If it fails to be billed or collected, you're out that money. So the workflow between paying that expense all the way to how it's billed to your client, all the way to how it's being reimbursed and that income being recorded, affects your bottom line directly. So again, think about how you're currently handling your client cost recovery and any gaps that you may have there. Allocating revenue. Very similar point. Gave that example of that invoice payment. This is basically what I'm talking about. When you have that $1,000 invoice, it could be made up of fee, cost, late charges, maybe some indirect costs and direct costs, basically overhead. How is that $1,000 payment that comes in, how is that broken down from an accounting perspective? Not billing, but accounting. It's not just $1,000 that gets dumped in an income account. You may have 800 that's fee, 200 that's cost. How is whatever workflow you have right now figuring that out? Also partial payments. We'll use that same example. You have a $1,000 invoice, you receive a payment of 500. Does that go towards your fee or your cost? In actuality, what should happen is it should cover your costs first and then go to fee. So if I had $200 in costs on that invoice, that 500 would apply towards the costs, and the remainder, which is 300, would go towards the fee. But how is that working right now? And is that actually calculating the way that it should for those partial payments? And then we talk about tracking income by class. So this is not necessarily a compliance requirement. It is not something, I mean, it can get into IRS compliance if you're recording your income incorrectly. That can factor into your tax reporting for sure. But this is so important to know where your money comes from. If you have multiple attorneys, which attorney is bringing in what? Which timekeeper is bringing in what? Which area of law is bringing in what? If you're a general practice, where is your profit? Where are you getting paid? Because you may have tons of clients and they're not paying you. So it's very important to have a firm grip on where this money is coming from, being able to report on it, and then make decisions based on that. Maybe you're not collecting in a certain area or from certain clients. Well, what can you do about that to actually bump up that income for the firm? So for accounting, here's some tips for technology. One is I highly recommend mobile access, meaning being able to access outside the office. The main reason from an accounting perspective is your costs. If you pay those costs at the courthouse or at even a parking garage or wherever you may be, and you don't have a way to capture it in the moment to ensure that it gets billed, you're likely not going to get reimbursed for that cost. So it allows you to not only be accurate with your description, but ensure it actually gets billed to your clients. Bank feeds and imports, those are quite standard in accounting software. If you find yourself not staying on top of your credit card transactions or forgetting to enter items into your accounting software, and there's always gaps, there's always differences, there's always things missing, take a look at bank feeds. It's a way to connect directly with your bank. It will feed in all of those transactions so you can see exactly what you may have missed, and you can fill that gap really easily. It also allows for daily reconciliation. You know, you can connect, let's say, your trust account, your live trust account to your accounting software and see each and every day what clears. Well, if something's not clearing or you see it cleared a different amount, you can address that today as opposed to at the end of the month when you normally would reconcile. For accounting, I highly recommend using legal specific tools, mainly for two things. One, trust accounting, definitely. Having safeguards which prevent you from overdrafting, prevent duplicate checks, make your system a little bit more inflexible so you can't go back and just change whatever you want. I think that's the biggest challenge with trust accounting especially, is using very flexible systems. And generic accounting tools are very flexible. If you use a legal specific tool, it will actually prevent you from doing the things that you should not be doing. And they do exist. Also, the reports is a second piece. The type of reports that you need if you were to get audited, for compliance reasons, you need to be able to produce those. So ensure that whatever system you're using right now, get that list, like I said, of what is required if you get audited so that you can be prepared. Always recommend acting like you'll be audited tomorrow. And then streamline your workflow between billing and accounting functions. So you'll notice throughout all the financials that we talk, the points that we talk about today, there's a lot of interaction between billing and accounting. Your costs start in accounting, then need to move to billing. Your invoice payments start with billing, but then need to move to accounting. And then your trust accounting actually affects both because you have retainers that are billing related, but you also have bank transactions, balances, checks, reporting, which is accounting related. So those are three huge examples of how billing and accounting work hand in hand all the time. So you want to make sure that there's a very clean communication between the two, whether that is your process, your system, and as little amount of gaps as possible to make sure that that information is correct. And here's kind of an example of that. Like I said, you may have billing functions in one place, accounting somewhere else. How do you make sure that those gaps that may exist are filled? It could be using a system that has both of these together so that they're working hand in hand, or it could be just a matter of having a much stronger checks and balances in place to catch items that may have been missed. All right, now let's dive into billing. So when we talk about day-to-day billing, here are the different items. These are probably ones you're a little bit more familiar with. Matter management, that is just setting up your matters, the billing method, the rates, and ensuring that there is one centralized area to make all of your various entries. Tracking your time and costs, could be through a timer, could be through an app, could be through those imports that I mentioned earlier. Your invoice creation and delivery, it may be kind of as needed if you do a little bit more fixed fee or contingency work, or it may be monthly or on a routine basis. Receiving those payments as they come in, that can definitely be ongoing. Managing retainers that you may have on hand or getting the replenishment of those retainers. Collection activities, being able to, and a lot of firms don't do this, is being able to follow up on those past due invoices and actually get paid for them or do activities to get paid for them. That itself is important also. I usually recommend looking into what you do currently and seeing if there's anything additional that you can do, especially with collection. And there's actually a lot of proactive things that you can do. You know, how you entering your time and costs immediately, being able to have a streamlined review process, having clear and concise invoices that your clients can understand, having a retainer on hand all the time. All of that can help with your collections. So if you realize that your AR balance is really high, there's a lot more that you can do even before that invoice gets sent out to your client. So now let's talk about the compliance challenges. Matter-centric records. This is hugely important for really all facets of your firm, but billing as well. You should be able to see very easily on a particular matter the billing history, all the invoices that went out, all the payments that came in, what is their current unpaid balance, what is the WIPS balance, basically what's due to be billed, what is the retainer balance, because not only is that information helpful, it helps you to plan things like, when is that invoice going to go out to them? Should it be sooner rather than later? Or do you even have enough retainer to cover the current WIPS balance that you're going to be billing in, let's say, a couple of weeks? If not, maybe you're going to seek replenishment that much sooner. So having everything in one place, easily accessible and visible to you day in and day out, will help you to actually stay on top of your billing and your collections issues that you may be having. Legal billing requirements. Know what your firm requires. This can differ across firms. What are your rate structures? Are they complex? Are they fairly standard? Do you practice all different types of billing method? Does whatever system you use allow for contingency or tracking time for your fixed fee billing? Are your invoices the way you need them to be to include compliance requirements like a trust retainer balance? Your invoices to your clients have to show what is available in trust. Do they show that right now? Are you leveraging the efficiency of batch billing, batch emailing, being able to track everything per person, whether it be a matter owner or a timekeeper. So those are a few examples of what law firms need to look at. So if you're using any sort of generic billing tool, you may be struggling with some of those parts. Unrecorded charges. So this is something that I mentioned before with accounting. It's very easy to use your credit card to put everything on and never have it get to your accounting system. And that's an easy way to you can even understand from a personal perspective, that's a way that your costs can get very out of control if you're not actually capturing them in some sort of system to keep track of what's going on. And that goes for your firm costs, but also your client costs. Late billing. You want to be able to get your bills out. Ideally, let's say you're doing monthly bills within the first week of the month. For some of you, that may seem perfectly normal. You're doing that right now. And for some, you may think that's impossible. And likely, if you think that's impossible, it's because your bill review process is very inefficient. And there's a lot of inefficiencies that can take place there. I covered quite a few of them already, like if you're at the end of the month thinking back at all the entries you may have missed, or if you don't track your time throughout the month at all, and you're trying to recreate that at the end of the month, that's quite common and is a huge delay. What is your workflow between the biller and the attorney or the timekeeper? How do they inform them of things that need to be updated, things that need to be changed, things that are finalized? When is that bill ready to go out to the client? And that whole timeline, keeping that as short as possible. I think billing is one of those areas that it is an unbillable activity. It is an administrative activity. So you want to be as efficient as possible. With the collections, I mentioned most firms don't have a process in place. So you do want to make sure to follow those proactive steps like I mentioned, doing everything you can to prevent delay of payment. But then also things like allowing online payments or credit card payments can help you to get paid that much quicker. The problem is many of you may have no process in place. You just hope you get paid. And in a service business, you're not going to get paid without some sort of follow-up or prompting to your clients. And again, the disconnect between billing and accounting. I think so many times most don't realize how closely connected the two of these functions are. So same applies as we did when we covered the accounting section. So how can technology help? Again, mobile access is great. I mentioned it before with capturing costs. With billing, it could be great for costs, but also your time. The amount of time it takes to be at a client appointment or to draft a document or to be in court, all the different activities you do take time. And if you're waiting till the end of the month or end of the week to think back on what took place, likely you're not going to be accurate with your tracking. Use matter-centric tools, which have that 360-degree view. I think really every legal specific tool is based on a matter, but obviously if you're not using a legal tool, you may struggle with this a little bit. Very often practice management tools allow not just the financials, but like the events, the tasks, the notes, and all of that to be centered around the matter as well. Really leverage your software to help be your billing and collections agent. It literally can be an employee for your business. You can get your invoices out in a batch. You can actually email them out in a batch. You can do collection notices in a batch. Like all of that could take you maybe several hours or days can just take a few minutes if you're leveraging your technology the right way. You may even have these functions in the tools you're using right now, but you're just not using them. So be aware of what functions are in your existing software. And if you don't have them, maybe look to other tools that can provide that batch billing activity for you. And offer electronic delivery, which is either through email or there's even client portals where you can deliver your invoices. Offer that as well as online payments for your clients. That is a huge convenience to them. You can even think from if you have a doctor or a bill online that you can pay, that's great. I pay all my bills online because it's a huge convenience to me. Same thing for your clients. They're everyday people. If they can pay online, that is an attractive service that you're providing. But you also can have different tools and services that actually integrate with your billing tool, so that way the entry of that payment, the updating of the invoice, even sometimes the accounting activity can happen automatically for you. So I highly recommend looking into that if you're noticing quite a bit of extra unbillable work happening with payments. And that wraps up our topic today. Of course, if any of you would love to learn a little bit about CosmoLex, we are a cloud-based legal practice management software, which handles your billing, your accounting, and your everyday tasks and activities as well. So,
all right, that is all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank our sponsor CosmoLex and all of you for attending our webinar today as part of the LTRC Industry Insight Series. I'd also like to give a special thank you to Erica for presenting today, and we will now conclude the webinar.
thank you for having me. Have a great day, everyone.